to wait for buses to come to pick us up.
If we were going to get people out, we were going to have to make it happen and deliver the Vietnamese to the big airplanes in some form or fashion. And the only way we could do that was keeping the airport open as long as we could.
Ambassador Martin still hoped that somehow this thing would not end with the North Vietnamese humiliating the United States by attacking Saigon. But it seemed like the North Vietnamese had other ideas.
What may be the final battle of Saigon has begun. Communist ground forces have started moving in on Saigon's Tan Son Nhut Airport.
Rockets exploded all over the base, touching off 3 major fires.
The air base was under continuous artillery fire. I felt the rounds. They were so close. The shrapnel was clinking against the fence behind us. It was abundantly clear that it was a whole new ball game.
We never expected any trouble out there. And then, of course, fear a little bit set in because now we knew that it really meant business, you know. Were they going to continue shelling Tan Son Nhut? They're giving us a warning, you know. Get out.
As the sun came up, General Smith, who was our defense attaché out at Tan Son Nhut, contacted the ambassador and said, the plan to use the fixed wing to get a few thousand people out today isn't going to work. And we need to consider that this is it. Option 4, a heavy lift helicopter evacuation. And Ambassador Martin wouldn't hear of it. He said, I want to come out there. I want to see it. Which he did. He got in a sedan. He didn't lack for guts. There was still rounds coming in. Sporadic. But there was still artillery fire. And he could see that the main runway was full of craters from North Vietnamese artillery. And it was understood that General Smith was not being premature with the recommendation for option 4.
Ambassador Martin's concern very clearly, up to now, was that once we start an official evacuation, it's pretty obvious that the game is over. You got to remember, this is an ambassador who had lost his only son in combat in Vietnam. One becomes pretty invested in that country. He had been holding out hope that some kind of third-party solution could be worked out so that South Vietnam could continue with some form of independence or autonomy. And he was being encouraged to think that this might be possible. But the morning of the 29th, he came to accept the fact that that wasn't going to happen.
And I picked up the phone and told Secretary Kissinger to inform the President that I had decided that we would have to go to option 4.
When I tell President Ford the airport is being shelled, and I say it's now time to pull the plug, he keeps coming back time and again. You really think we have to do it? That's how heartbreaking it was for him. He finally reluctantly gave the go-ahead for the final evacuation.
This is the American Forces Vietnam Network.
The prearranged signal for the evacuation was broadcast on American radio in Saigon. The message was the temperature is 105 and rising, and then Bing Crosby's White Christmas. And sure enough, about 10 o'clock in the morning, I believe, on the 29th, there was Bing Crosby on the airwaves.
I'm dreaming of a white Christmas, just like the ones I used to know, where the treetops glisten and children listen to hear sleigh bells in the snow.
That morning, Ambassador Martin received a message that said, within 24 hours, the U.S. presence in Vietnam had to be closed out, meaning we had to be gone. It was obvious that there was the need for a hasty plan to be developed for a helicopter airlift out of the embassy to the fleet. And we had less than 24 hours to pull it off.
That morning, there must have been, I would guess, at least 10,000 people literally ringing the embassy. The embassy compound was the size of a city block. It was big. And all sides of it were filled 200-300 feet back. Fortunately, people were by and large very controlled. They were very patient. They were just hoping desperately to get in.
It's like the whole Saigon want to get inside the American embassy. So you have to know somebody, you know. Just like me, I find my friend and got this little paper to assure us to get in. So several of us went to the embassy. And my friend, he showed the paper to the guard, and he just kind of pointing it to each one of us, and we, one by one, to go inside the embassy. When I first got in, I feel so good. I in America, I almost there. They have a courtyard and a swimming pool, and we mostly gather around the swimming pool, and 1,000 people there. And they just keep coming in.
That morning, CIA choppers began picking up evacuees off the roofs of buildings around the city and bringing them to the embassy. There was an old pilot named Obie Harnage. He was blind in one eye and lame in one leg. And I said, Harnage, we got people at 6 Chalong. You gotta go pick them up. It was the deputy CIA station chief's apartment building. There were a number of very high-risk Vietnamese, including the defense minister of South Vietnam, all waiting to be rescued. As they climbed up the ladder to the roof, a photographer took that famous photograph. Many people thought that was the U.S. Embassy. It wasn't. But it indicated to what extent chaos had descended on this entire operation.
Inside the embassy, everywhere we looked, was teeming with Vietnamese. We counted them, and the total number was about 2,800. There was no hiding it that somehow people had to have let these people into the embassy. Was it, Marine security guards who kind of looked the other way? Was it American employees in the embassy who were doing kind of what we did with black ops and taking care of their own? We never got to the bottom of that. And frankly, we never pursued it.
One of my Marines said to me, you know, we should take out the tailor. There was a tailor who made all our civilian clothes. So I said, why don't we take out the cook too? He said, well, you should take out the cook too, and all the other cooks. They should get out. They had business with Americans. So they took the bread truck and they rounded up the tailor, the cooks and the dishwashers, a few others, and their families, and drove them into the embassy compound.
There was in the parking lot of the embassy a great tamarind tree, which the ambassador had often referred to as steadfast as the American commitment in Vietnam. The CIA station chief that last morning said, Mr. Ambassador, we have to cut this tree down.
You could not land any large helicopters on the parking lot unless the tree and all the shrubbery was all gone. The ambassador had resisted us cutting that tree because he did not want anybody to be alerted that we were doing any sort of evacuation or were going to do any sort of evacuation.
He was upset, but finally he succumbed, you know, to just common sense and gave up his, I guess you could call it a dream. And we cut it down.
He had also, for the past few days, prevented us from burning classified documents for fear that it would panic the South Vietnamese. So that morning of the 29th, we had thousands of pages of classified documents we had failed to destroy beforehand.
Our next job was just looking at that classified document idea and getting rid of that. So we went to every office and told them to start pulling stuff, and piles of paper began coming out. And we began shredding. There was a small building where we handled the pay for the Vietnamese who worked for the embassy. And in this building, there was over $1 million in US currency. So we had to send a message to the Navy, who sent it to the Treasury Department, who came back and said, destroy it. So I assigned a few Marines to get rid of the money. And I said, oh, by the way, we're gonna lock you in there. It took them 8 hours to burn $1 million.
That morning, fear and desperation were the order of the day. But I had a job to do. It was an important job to do, I thought, to deny the enemy the South Vietnamese naval ships.
Thì ông nói rằng, Đại tá Kiểm, chậm lắm rồi, ông phải ra đi ngay. Thì lúc đó cái kế hoạch của chúng tôi là thứ nhất là bỏ hết tất cả các sự sửa chữa thông thường và chỉ chú trọng vào các cái bộ phận chính của một chiếc tàu, tức là máy tránh. Nếu mà một máy cũng tính là chạy được, thay vì 2 máy, nhưng mà một máy chạy được cũng được, một máy điện cũng chạy.
We had expected, frankly, a longer time period to get ready. We had been told by people in our intelligence community that we might have as long as the 4th of May. But the North Vietnamese were closing in quite tightly, and clearly it was time to send the signal to leave.
Thì chúng tôi có chừng khoảng 32 chiến hạm lớn, có 30 chiến hạm lớn có thể đi được. Cũng tính với lại ông Armitage rằng tôi sẽ cố gắng cho thủy thủ đoàn ra đi càng đông càng tốt. Thì tôi nói thủy thủ đoàn chắc chắn để đi, nhưng mà còn gia đình của họ sẽ không đi nếu không có gia đình họ đi theo.
I knew this, but I didn't know how many civilians were going to be on board. I had no idea.
Nó quá cái nhiệm vụ của tôi. Trên tôi còn có những người cao cấp hơn tôi. Tại sao họ không làm? Anh em mình cứ thấy rằng đó là cái nhiệm vụ của mình thì là làm. Và khi đã làm đó thì phải làm cho chót. Thì trong khi cái sự mà tính rằng làm cho chót đó đôi khi vượt quá cả cái nhiệm vụ của mình, nhưng vẫn làm, vì cái đó là lẽ phải.
I was the first one into the embassy. And my only mission at this time, this is early in the afternoon, was to bring the ambassador out. It was actually a mission, it was called Embassy Snatch. I was just supposed to get the ambassador. I land and I said to the people, I said, I'm here to get the ambassador. And said, well, not quite.
The ambassador refused to leave until he could get as many Vietnamese on as many choppers as possible. The evacuation of Vietnamese happened because Graham Martin wanted it to happen.
So they loaded some Vietnamese on my helicopter. And because I'm supposed to have the ambassador on board, we go right to the command ship, the USS Blue Ridge. We land on the Blue Ridge. General Carey comes out, wants to know where the ambassador is. He said, well, he didn't get on. I mean, I don't know who I'm supposed to tell, but I told everybody I was supposed to get the ambassador, but the ambassador didn't get on. So that starts the lift. Like I say, we had 75 Marine Corps helicopters. You and your wingman would fly into the embassy, get your passengers loaded, and fly back out to the ships. It was a little over an hour back and forth.
On the USS Kirk, our mission was to protect the helicopters moving from the embassy out to the aircraft carriers and back and forth. We were very close to the action.
You could stand there on the deck and you could watch it all happening. We thought that the USS Kirk was just going to be an observer to this whole thing, and when all of a sudden on radar we started seeing these little blips coming out from the shore.
I really don't know where to start. We looked up at the horizon, and all you could see were helicopters, all heading toward us.
These were not Marine Corps helicopters. They were small helicopters, the little Hueys, which were never part of the evacuation plan. But they were flying over top of us. We were watching them fly over top, over and over and over again.
We viewed them as enemy until we could verify who it was. Then we realized that these were South Vietnamese trying to escape. I figured if we could save one, at least we save 15, 20 people. They were packed in there like sardines. So I made a decision, land the helicopter.
One of our sailors could speak rudimentary Vietnamese, so we put him on the radio and he started broadcasting. This is ship 1087, land here.
So we got his attention, he came flying over, he landed on our flight deck. And it turned out that the pilot, he was the pilot for the deputy chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, real high up. And he had the general with him. It was a two-star general. And the two-star general's nephew, 3 women, about 4 children. It was a big deal for us.
When it landed, we got everything off, and I looked up because there were 5, 6, 7 stacked up ready to land.
Turned out all throughout the southern part of Vietnam, there were South Vietnamese Army and Air Force installations with 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 helicopters. And those helicopters were flyable, their pilots were there, and when they realized that the evacuation was happening and they weren't going to be part of it, they said, oh yeah, we are.
These young Vietnamese pilots would go to their homes, land right in their front yards, pick up their families and anybody else and head out to sea, hoping they can rendezvous with the ship. Well, we're one of the first ships they saw.
Our flight deck will only take 1 helicopter at a time landing. There are no wheels on them, you just have skids. We couldn't think of what else to do, and these other planes were looking for a place to land, so we just physically pushed them.
Of course, this was a big old helicopter, thousands of pounds, so we had to figure out how to get it 15 feet over to the edge of the flight deck.
You don't have time to think about what you did, you just had to do it. So we opened up our flight deck, and they began to land, one right after the other. Some of them were shot at, holes in them.
Most of the Vietnamese who came out, I'm talking about the flight crews, they were heavily armed, all with sidearms, some with M16 rifles. They had no idea what was going to happen, so they came out ready for anything, really. So we had to disarm them.
None of them had ever landed on a ship before. They were Vietnamese Air Force. Everybody had a gun. We took all the guns away from them. And about 5 minutes later, another one came in and landed. And we pushed his airplane over the side. I was the second one. I helped push that one over too. Then the third plane came in. It landed also. We pushed it over the side. So meanwhile, we've thrown 3 helicopters in the water so far. This is incredible. I know you're probably not believing any of this, but it's all true.
By late afternoon, the chopper flow at the embassy really started. And each time a bird came in, here would go another 40, 50 people. But did the right mix of people get out? You know, who says that these were the people who either deserved or should have gone out? At the embassy, a lot of the people who got out happened to be good wall jumpers.
The choppers started coming in at 10-minute intervals. One would land on the roof, and one would land on the parking lot. They would put all the Vietnamese in groups, they would search them, and if they had any weapons, all these weapons were thrown into the swimming pool. And as soon as the chopper would land, they would be brought into the restricted area, where a couple of the Marines would escort them into the aircraft. Then the race would ramp up and take off.
I remember I told to my friend, and he said, "Oh, it's our turn now. We're almost there, you know." So we're all excited. And I remember very distinctively that every time a helicopter coming down, it just blew us away. We had to kind of duck down to fight with the wind of the chopper.
Three of the choppers that came in each landed a platoon of 40 Marines from the task force. They had to be brought in because we didn't have enough Marines in the embassy security guard to secure the walls.
I went with my wife to the embassy. A lot of people, they clinched to the top of the wall, but they couldn't get in.
Each gate was besieged like that, although the side gate was the principal place where they came. People holding letters saying, you know, I worked for the Americans, please let me in. Journalists were arriving and counting on being recognized to be let in by the Marines.
There was a sea of people wanting to get out by helicopters. But, well, they looked up at the helicopters leaving, and I could see their eyes, desperate eyes.
My dad flew a Chinook helicopter in the South Vietnamese Air Force. He had been waiting for orders, but his captain had, basically just left. So he and some other pilots picked out the best Chinooks and took off. He said it was the Wild West at this point. Just you and your horse, and you just do what you had to do to survive and take care of your family. He had given my mom a heads up that if she did hear a Chinook coming, to get ready. I was 6.5 years old. I can still hear the rumbling, very, familiar rumbling of a Chinook. When you hear the Chinook coming, you know it's coming. I knew my dad was coming. In Saigon during my childhood, it was like, say, living in the middle of busy LA. So there's really not a big area to land the Chinook. So he came in and landed in a playfield. Caused a lot of wind, caused a lot of commotion. My mom grabbed my little sister, who was about 6 months at that time, and I have a little brother who was about 3 or 4 years old, myself. We quickly ran into the Chinook, and we all flew off out into the Pacific Ocean. My dad was afraid for not having enough fuel, afraid for a lot of things. He was just flying blind. And then he saw a ship out there.
In the middle of the day, after we had taken those first helicopters aboard, this huge helicopter called a Chinook, they came out and tried to land on the ship. Oh, the thing almost crashed on board our ship.
This big Chinook showed up. There's no way he can land on Kirk without impacting the ship. He would have killed everybody on this helicopter plus my crew.
It was way too big to land. We thought that the helicopter would just fly away. But as the ship was moving forward, probably 4, 5, 6 knots, something like that, the pilot communicated that he was running low on fuel.
He opened up the port side of the helicopter and he hovered across the stern of the Kirk. Then all of a sudden, here comes a human.
One by one, we'd jump out. I jumped out, my brother jumped out. My mom was holding my sister, obviously very scared. And she just, just trustingly, just with one hand, with her right hand, holding on with her left to brace herself, just dropped my baby sister.
One fella standing there, and he said he looked up and he saw this big bundle of stuff come flying out, and it was a baby. It was the 1-year-old baby. And then the mother jumped out and he caught her too. Then the pilot flew out on our starboard right side. He hovered with his wheels in and out of the water. He hovered there for like 10 minutes. And we couldn't figure out what he was doing. It turned out what he was doing was taking his flight suit off. Here's a man flying a twin-rotor helicopter by himself. At the same time, he's taking off a flight suit. How you do it, I've talked to helicopter pilots, and they can't figure out how he did that. How like a Houdini trying to get out of this thing. And finally, he made the helicopter roll to the right as he stepped out the door on the left.
Just thunderous, loud noise. The shrapnel is just blowing up. Suddenly, just quiet. And he pops up, and he's alive.
And he swam away. And the helicopter was only about 20 feet from him when it hit the water. It was amazing.
We went out, picked him up. He was no worse for the wear. He was a little bit wet. Well, one unfortunate thing is he had some small bars of gold, which was all his worldly possessions, that were in his shirt pocket that sank. So he lost everything. He didn't own a thing but his underwear. when he finally came aboard the ship. He was a tremendous pilot. The guy was just so cool and calm. We've so far taken a total of 17 helicopters. We ended up with 157 people aboard the ship.
That crew was very special. They took their money, went to the Navy Exchange and Commissary, bought all the clothes, the food they could get, took it up and gave it to the refugees they befriended. They were unbelievable.